Hi guys, so this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a while. I wanted to explain what is the ZEV mandate and what does it mean for you as a car buyer. We all know that last year UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak delayed the deadline for the stopping of the sale brand new of internal combustion engine cars. So basically, the original deadline was that by 2030, the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK would be completely banned. So that was pushed forward to 2035, or pushed back, I should say, pushed back till 2035. And there was much rejoicing amongst petrol heads and car guys, and including me. But that's only because I always anticipated that that would happen. Even now, I'm a little skeptical, but certainly the 2031, because that was actually 5 years before the deadline in Europe, which was always 2035 anyway. So for the UK, it's a small market to take that step compared to these massive markets where it was 2035 and 2040 in some cases, was a little bit out of step. So whilst we were all like, oh yeah, great, this has happened, we'll still be able to buy petrol cars in the year 2034, the reality is that that might not be as easily done as you might think. And that's because the ZEV mandate, which in its proposal form existed the whole of last year anyway, and then came into force this month, January 2024, regardless of the 2030 and 2035 deadline. What does that mean exactly? I'll tell you everything right after this.
A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
Right then, so the ZEV mandate, what is it? What does it mean? The ZEV mandate, which basically kicked in at the beginning of January 2024, so from this year, basically stipulated that there would be a certain percentage of EVs that manufacturers must sell in the UK. So basically what that means is that in the year 2024, this year, 22% of all vehicles that a manufacturer sells in this country, in the UK, have now got to be EVs. In practical terms, that means that, say for example, we sold about 1.8 something, 1.9 million vehicles in the UK. Let's say 2 million. Let's just say 2 million. That means that we have to sell, or the manufacturers rather have to sell, and we have to buy about 440,000 electric vehicles in the year 2024, out of the total of, as we've assumed, sales of 2 million vehicles. Keep in mind that in total, there are just under 1 million vehicles, electric cars, I should say, that are on the road in the UK. So under 1 million electric vehicles on the road today. In 2024, the ambition is to sell, well, not the ambition, but actually the target by law, by regulation, is 440,000, let's say 500,000. So you want to increase by 50%, which has taken several years for us to get this number of EVs on the road, and we want to increase those by 50% in just 1 year. And the manufacturers really have no choice in it. Before I get into that, let me just give you the rest of the percentages, because these percentages, not just 24% from here on, 24% is just for this year. And then it increases every year. And it gets to 100% by the year 2035. That 100%, i.e. 100% of all cars sold in the year 2035 must be EVs. So the way it works is 2024, I'll put these on screen because it'll be easier. 2024 is 22%, as I've said. Then it goes to 28%, then 33%, then 38%, then 52%, and then 66%. And by 2030, it's 80%. Now you may be thinking, oh well, surely that is a difference between what it was before, because 2030 we said we would be banning petrol and diesel cars and only having EVs, so surely the previous target was 100% for 2030 and now it's 80%. No, it was 80% then as well. The reason being, don't forget that there was going to be an exemption for hybrid vehicles, for some hybrid vehicles is what they said. They never actually defined which ones they were. I think it was fair to assume that they would have been plug-in hybrid vehicles, but there was going to be an exemption for those. That's now no longer the case. Now it's all lumped together anyway, so that doesn't make a difference anymore. So it was 80% then, it's still 80% now. So as you can see, moving the 2030 deadline to 2035 in real terms, in actual terms, has had no effect whatsoever. It's still, the targets are actually still the same. And just to finish that off, for 2031 it's 84%, for 2032 it's 88%, then 92%, then 96%, and of course, like I said, 100% by 2035. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about commercial vehicles in this video, but it does apply to commercial vehicles as well. But this year, in 2024, the requirement is 10% of commercial vehicles, i.e. vans, have to be electric. So it's a lot less than petrol cars, but it ramps up fairly quickly as well. So that's got 10%, then 16%, then 24%, then 34%, then 46%, then 58%, and by 2030, it's 70% have to be EVs. That's how it goes. No, just there was another thing about EVs, which I just wanted to say somewhere. There's a grant, okay, for vans, I mean. There was a grant. The government also introduced several new schemes to lower the upfront and running costs of owning an EV. And so there was a plug-in grant of about £2,500 for small vans and £5,000 for large vans. And this was probably, I think, up to 2025 that will be available. And there were some other little grants and things, not hugely substantial compared to that. And then, of course, the government was making the case that, yeah, but overall, running an EV is, they work out, or they think, research says, it shows that it's about £150 cheaper to maintain per year. So they're saying it works out better that way. So let's go back to what I was talking about, those percentages. You may be thinking, well, you know, what about my favorite supercar maker, especially petrol heads here? What about my favorite supercar maker? What about Ferrari? What about Lamborghini? What about Caterham? What about Morgan that make all these, you know, low volume cars here? Well, they do have an exemption. So specialists in low volume car manufacturers and basically manufacturers that sell less than 1,000 cars in the UK, they are actually exempt from this. So they can continue to do that, at least for now. I think that's going to change, but I think that for now, that is the case. So, but it's tight. Because I was just looking, I think Caterham sells about 700 plus cars a year. Morgan sells about 800 cars a year. Ferrari and Lamborghini are both just under or around the 1,000 mark. So what this actually means is that you're restricting the number of cars that they can sell. You're basically putting a cap, a ceiling on their ambitions to increase their annual sales, which of course all manufacturers want to do. Now Ferrari, don't forget, do have hybrid cars, but that doesn't apply in this case, whereas it will in some European markets, I believe. So basically, you're putting a lid on their ambition, so they can only sell that number of cars, which they're already doing. Which means that any hope of those cars getting cheaper is out the window. If anything, those cars are going to get more expensive because they know they can only sell a certain amount. So they don't have to work hard to sell those cars now. I'll come back to that about the pricing thing in a minute. Now, what happens if a manufacturer can't do it? What if they can't meet that target? It's like, well, we can't sell 22% of our cars electric. What happens then? Well, they get fined. They're going to get fined. So the penalties are set at £15,000 for every non-compliant car, non-EV car that they sell over their allotted amount. So they have basically 22% must be EVs, which means, get my maths right, 78% of their cars they can sell are non-EVs, so petrol and diesel. Diesel sales obviously diminishing rapidly, but petrol and diesel. And therefore, if they sell 79%, they will have to be fined on every single car that they sell above that 78%. It's £15,000. Vans also have penalties, or those selling vans also have penalties. Those penalties start at £9,000. It's a bit less in 2024, but you think it's less, but it then jumps immediately to £18,000 thereafter. So they've given them like a year leeway, and then it rapidly jumps. So you imagine if a manufacturer does sell that, does sell more, you know, petrol, diesel cars, and they have to add £15,000 to the price of that car. If we're talking about high-end sports cars, luxury cars, whatever, that might not make a difference. But if you're talking about mid-range cars in the 20 to 25, £30,000 bracket, where most people buy cars, you're suddenly adding £15,000 on there. You're talking about 30,000 cars going up to £45,000. Yeah, that's certainly going to put a lot of people off. So that's how that's going to work. But is there another way around this? Is there another way that they can do it? Well, there are, initially at least, there will be a credit system. Now, the credit system, it says in the early years, the credit system, basically for makers that fail to meet those targets, what they can do is that they can buy and sell these credits. So, for example, if you take a manufacturer like Tesla or BYD, which are only selling EVs in the UK, then they're 100% EVs. So then they still have that credit for this, the 22% that they can sell, which is internal combustion engine. So they can take that credit and then they can trade it with another manufacturer. So another manufacturer says, look, I'm not going to be able to sell these many EVs. Can I buy these credits off you? And then, so overall, the market will still be at 22%, the overall UK market, but individually manufacturers could trade so that they could slightly go a little bit above their 22% if they can. However, this is restricted. So the maximum credit that they can borrow will be 75% in 2024, and that also then decreases. So by 2026, in 2 years' time, that just goes down to 25%. So they can only, like this year, they could buy up to 75% credit from an EV manufacturer or an EV seller only to increase their buffer zone. But by 2026, that's only 25%. So they have to get on their EV game. So manufacturers literally have no choice now. They actually have to sell EVs. So love them or hate them, there's more and more of these going to come into the market. Manufacturers are totally going to be pushing these because they have no choice at all. It's not just here, of course, it's happening around the world. Of course, European law, the 2020-35, they're going to change to EVs only. But there's something similar, for example, in California, where they also have a similar mandate. They actually started this back in 1990, but I think it's still pretty relaxed because EVs have to be 25% of their sales by 2025. So they're still a little bit more relaxed than here in the UK, but it's something similar is happening. Now let's look at the number of EVs that we've got. Like I said, we're talking just under 1 million EVs on the road at the moment. This year in 2024, we want to up it to 22% of all sales must be EVs. So therefore, we want to add 440,000 EVs to that current car park, so to speak. So essentially another 500,000, so take it up to 1.5 million. So how are we doing? Well, 14.5% of all of sales of car sales in the UK in 2022 were EVs, 14.5%, and last year in 2023 I believe it was 16.5%. So it went up by 2%. So if it goes up by 2%, then you're looking at 18.5% if it was a natural thing this year. But of course it's not a natural thing, it's 22%. So you're looking at another 1.5%, another 3.5% on top of that. So that's how far and how hard they're pushing the UK car industry and manufacturers and dealers into moving across to EVs. So that's a massive jump that we're going to have to see this year. And we know at the end of 2023 that increase actually had tailed off a little bit. So actually, I wouldn't say it had gone down, but it had kind of sort of plateaued. So it had gone like that a little bit. So there's already a little bit of a struggle. We do know that around the world, some manufacturers are dialing back. We know that in America, Ford have put off making F-150 Lightnings for a bit. We know that General Motors has taken out some investment. We know that they've abandoned their partnership with Honda to produce more EVs. So some manufacturers are showing signs already of responding to market demands and going, whoa, we need to dial back, because people just don't want them at the moment. And that's partly to do with lots of doubts, lots of skepticism around EVs, but also limited infrastructure. The infrastructure is not quite there yet in a lot of these countries. So a lot of the response has to come from that side as well. If you want more people to get into EVs, you have to provide them ease of use in order to do that. So again, going back to the portion of cars, like I said, 1.9 million cars sold in the UK. Let's round it up to 2 million to be generous and be optimistic. 440,000 cars have to be sold this year. But if we fast forward to 2030, we are talking about 80% EV, in which case the number of petrol cars available there, and I'm just going to say petrol because I think diesel will be pretty much wiped out by then. Diesel is just massively declined. And I think whilst there will be a market in the commercial sector for diesel, I think that in the passenger sector and in the consumer sector, I think we will see that go right down. So let's talk about petrol. In the year 2030, there will only be 400,000 petrol cars sold, because 80% of all cars sold have to be EVs. So only 400,000 petrol cars will be available, put it that way, in 2030. It could be less. It could be less actually, because manufacturers are in their race to gear up and to revamp their entire product ranges and product lineups to change to EVs, could well take a lot of the petrol cars off sale well before then. So technically it could be less than that. And of course, they're all trying to hit that target. Don't forget the credit system, is not going to be generous by that time, and the fines are going to be there. So it could be less than that. But 400,000, like the maximum petrol cars that you'll be able to buy in 2030. So for those people thinking that, oh, now they've moved it to 2035, this is great because I'm going to buy a petrol car in 2034 and then that will last me, for another 20 years or so, possibly. But two things. A, it'll be really hard to find the car that you want because it may not be available anymore. And B, it'll be very expensive because there'll be so few of them available. And I anticipate that the demand will still be there. So the values of those cars, we're talking about price parity between EVs and petrol cars expected by 2025 to 2027. So certainly by 2030, we should see it flip around the other way where electric cars are cheaper than petrol cars. Certainly with these stringent enforcements in place, it will mean that petrol cars will be more expensive than EVs because there'll just be fewer, and there'll be demand for them. So that's what will happen. Now, the only question amongst all of this is that what happens if people don't buy these cars? And I think that's a major, major dilemma, not only for the governments who have set these targets, arbitrary or otherwise, but the targets have been set, but also for the manufacturers themselves, because how will they survive? Because they have to sell product. And if they don't sell product, then what are they doing? And if they don't have the cars that make up that EV offering, then they can't survive. And if consumers don't buy the EVs from them, they can't afford to exist. They can't even afford to sell you the petrol cars. So for example, if you say like, I'm going to go to this manufacturer because they got a lot of petrol cars, then that manufacturer itself is going to be like, well, we're going to close shop or we're going to go out of business. That's what's going to happen. Or they're just going to withdraw from the UK market ahead of that deadline. So this is the situation we're in right now. So this has happened. This is happening. This is now in effect. 2024, this is now in effect. This is now happening. And just going back to cars that petrol heads like, again, you'll see very, very few of those now. Like I said, with the low volume things like the Caterhams and the Morgans and the Ferraris and Lamborghinis, yes, but they'll get more expensive. But like the stuff you could buy today, like a Toyota GR86 or a Mazda MX-5, I mean, these will disappear or they'll become so expensive that they'll be like supercar prices anyway, because their volumes will be so tiny because they have to do it that way. So there you go. That's what's happening. That's what the ZEV mandate is. That's what it means. That's what it means for the car buyer going forward here in the UK. The reality is that the market is dramatically shifting towards EVs from previously, but definitely from this year on, because it has to. Because it absolutely has to, or it cannot survive. Dealers and manufacturers will not be able to survive with these hefty fines and these limitations on what they can do. So the transition is happening. This is how it's going to happen. The only thing I suppose that could change is if there is a massive, massive drop-off in sales, and then everything has to be thought out again, I suppose. In the meantime, what I would say to people that are hoping to continue with petrol, maybe diesel, but certainly with petrol cars going forward, if you had the notion that I'll just wait till 2034 and buy the last cars available, don't think like that. Buy the car you want now, but look after it, because that's going to last you. If you want that to last you 20, 30 years, then you have to look after it. But you need to buy that now, because now you still can. But this is pretty much the last year. I mean, you think about the fact that next year, that goes up to 28%. So a third, and pretty much like a third. So even at the moment, we're talking about 1 in 5 cars have to be EVs. By next year, we're talking about a third, 1 in 3 cars have to be EVs. So you can see how that's changing. Certainly, it's definitely by 2026, it's 33%. So that's definitely 1 in 3. So between here and there, we're going from 1 in 5 cars to 1 in 3 cars. So it's pretty massive. It's a massive change. I mean, that jump, just think about it. From 2024 to 2025, 22% to 28%, 6% in addition. It's a big jump. So there you go. So that would be my advice. If you are thinking that, oh no, I'm going to stick with petrol, I'm going to stick with diesel, you need to get those cars now. You need to get those cars now, either put them away for later, like some people do, or just really look after them because they're going to last you the long run. Or you're going to make the transition to EVs. That's what's going to happen, which for a lot of people will work. I mean, you need to look at your set of situations and circumstances because the EVs will make a lot of sense. And if you are thinking of dabbling in it and trying in it, keep in mind the prices of used EVs have fallen dramatically. So they're now actually quite affordable. So if you want to give one a go, that's probably the route to take. Buy a used one, try it out, get used to it, because going forward, that's what we're all going to be driving, it seems. Thanks so much. I'd love to hear your comments on this one, and I'll catch you all in the next video.
brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. Just go here or right here on YouTube. Just hit these three little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.